Hello, I'm Jenny Klochko and you're watching my podcast. Today I talk to Aiden Aslin. It's going to be very difficult for me, but I guess it's going to be very difficult for him as well. Aiden Aslin, he was fighting for Ukraine when the big invasion happened. He was in Mariupol. He was captured. He spent in Russian captivity in prison. He was sentenced to death, but thank God he was released on 21st of September 2022. He and a few other Brits were taken to Britain again, and look at him, he's back to Ukraine again. So while I'm in London here, he's in Ukraine. Hi, Aiden.
Hi, pleasure to be on.
How are you today?
No, I'm good. Like keeping track of the news, so like I'm in better mood.
Do you mean Kursk People's Republic?
Yeah, I mean it's hard not to like notice like what's going on there. So I mean it's always good news, like seeing we're taking ground.
I was introducing you, but I haven't mentioned that you wrote the book about your experience, and you wrote the book with my friend John Sweeney. And
yeah.
So I guess you've got the flavor of the man, and was a good experience working with John.
Yeah, I mean when I got released, like I never had any like thoughts about making a book, but I knew, especially with the situation with Ukraine and like the continuing of the war, I knew the thing that we needed to do as soon as possible was to like get the word out there about what Russian captivity is like, because especially with myself being like a Westerner, I felt like people like back, especially back home in Britain, they would be more inclined to like listen and read about it because they have that sort of relation with me being a British person. And then there was also like during my time in captivity, one of my commanders who I spent a month with in the Donetsk pre-trial detention center. I remember he was telling me at one point that like if I get out, because he was pretty determined I was going to get released before he did, and he was telling me that I should like write a book, like just be as vocal as I can about everything that they've done to us there. So I think that's like two main reasons like to go through with it, and then eventually I met John, and I asked him like how can I make this happen, and John like helped me along the way, and I've like known of John's work for like a long time. Like I grew up watching like Panorama.
No, you stop! No, listen to me! You are not there at the beginning of that interview! You were not there! You did not hear or record all the interview! Do you understand?
So like I was like very familiar with his like work, especially like Scientology and everything else. So like I respected him as like a journalist. So for me, like I was happy because I had someone that understood the situation.
You know, I met John in 2014 when MH17 was shut down, and I was already working with Panorama. But this was MH17 was our first project together, and you're absolutely right. Working with other journalists, you have to explain a lot of context, and sort of like, and sometimes it's very frustrating. And with John, it was like a breath of fresh air because he understood the context. He was getting everything. So there was just, it wasn't just a pleasure. Even the news, the story was horrific. But it was a pleasure working with him. We became friends since then. So there was many other projects.
Yeah.
I talked to John about, we're going to have interviews. And there's something he asked me to do. So I would never do this to you, would never. But this is sort of John, and let's see how you react on it. He told me you have a good voice.
I mean, I hear it a lot, but I don't believe it.
Well, and he said that your singing is very good. And also, you know the Russian anthem.
Yeah.
Could you give the viewers sort of like, could you sing just one or two lines and then explain everyone how did you learn the anthem?
I wouldn't be able to do it now because my friend's kid's asleep. But if I remember correctly, it was a lot easier in captivity because you always had the threat of being beaten if you like didn't say it right. But I'm like trying to remember how the first sentence like Russia Sishenaya Nasha Dijava Russia. I can't even remember like how it goes. And that was like one of the other things they did in captivity. It's easier to sing it and it's harder to like say it. And they would always like ask. They'll tell people to start speaking about start saying the anthem, but people would start to sing, and then they said no, you've got to like talk normal, and it's like a lot harder to like say it like at a normal talking pace because you have no rhythm to go by, so you like pretty lost if you don't memorize it like pretty well.
But how did you learn it? And whether it was easy for you or you were refusing, and if you were refusing, what the Russians did to you?
So when we arrived to the prison, this is like at the Donetsk pre-trial detention prison. So it was like a month after like being captured. And when you arrive here, like it seems pretty normal, and then you go through this like you get bag on your head, and then you have to like basically crawl to your prison cell. But while you're crawling to your prison cell, you're being beaten. And then when you get to the cell, it stops, and they tell you the prison rules, and they tell you you've got to learn the Russian anthem. And on the wall of the prison cell, there's the lyrics to the Russian anthem. And with me being a foreigner, the guard was like somewhat nice, if I can say that. He says like you've got like 5 days to learn it, but like with the Ukrainians, like they had to learn it by the next morning. And they basically said if we don't learn it and if you don't sing it, like you're going to get beaten. And especially like after you've just come through that like gauntlet of being beaten, like everyone knows pretty much like they're in charge, like you do what they say. And I think it took me like a week to learn it, and in the beginning it was like sort of like easy, if I can say it was difficult, but it was easy because like it's the Russian anthem. It's like a pretty famous anthem like rhythm, like it's like the same as the Soviet like anthem to a degree. So like you know the rhythm in your head because you've heard it on like media and everything. And my friend who was a major in my battalion, he was helping me learn it. And I remember saying to him like, what happens like if we don't learn it? And he turned around and just said like, well, they're going to fuck me and then they're going to fuck you. So that was like pretty much the incentive to like just learn it, because we'd always hear people being beaten when they would arrive. So like you wanted to try and not make the guards angry.
I can't imagine. Do you know, I was talking to people who were in captivity, and those who were defending Mariupol just like you. And I noticed it's especially in the early days when only the first waves, especially when you were on the 21st of September, I was in Kiev back then. And I remember sort of like this rumors among British media. And when I contact people from intelligence and from other, they say, just please keep quiet for a few hours. Just we will tell you everything. Just be quiet. And I remember sort of like, sitting and checking all the social media, being on the phone. And then finally, and, this mix of joy, pain, and realization there's so many people left behind. So those who were released, it's very difficult for them to talk. They say, we don't want to say something that could harm those who left. How does it work? Why those who, like you, were liberated can harm by telling the stories about captivity?
I've heard this as well, but like I think in general, a lot of people say it because they're afraid that they might be held responsible from what happens. But like in reality, like the conditions like that are inside like the regime there, like it's not going to change regardless. Like people are still going to be beaten. Like during the whole time that I was there, when we would come under shelling, because the Russians, they would park like a Grad rocket truck like just outside of the prison, and they would shoot, and then there'd be return fire, and every time there'd be like shelling like exchanges, the guards would take it out on us regardless. So like either way, like nothing changes like in terms of like the regime inside. The only thing that I would agree with like in this regard is obviously you never like tell people's names, or you don't give information about those that you're with for obvious reasons. So in like just that basic terms, like conditions will be just as worse as they were like compared to what like some other people like are a bit fearful about.
You know, when those who were released, they obviously asked about guards. Sort of and what surprises me, it is sort of like there's degrees, like more vicious, less vicious. And my question is, how actually can be, you know, this normalization of keeping people for, you know, for no crime, torturing them, and then actually sort of like take it as a normal. What kind of people can do that, and what kind of thinking behind it? And you as experienced soldier, you're no civilian, so maybe you get, you know, deeper perspective on this.
So like from my perspective, like I mean, before the invasion, I'd already studied a lot into like Russia itself. I studied like a lot of like history with like the Soviet Union, and then also the Tsar like era. So I knew like a great deal about like Russia in general, just because it was like I'm like a pretty like big history nerd, but also because I like to know who I'm fighting. And I'd done my like research with like the war in Georgia and Grozny, so I knew 100% like how they treated like POWs, and like from my experience inside, like from what I understand is they still have that culture like mentality of like the Soviet mentality, which is made worse now by like the Putinism, which is like the mix between communism and fascism. And I think the reason why so many people like do the things that they do in captivity, like in regards to treatment of like POWs or just executions and torture, is the fact that no one's ever told them no. So because it's been allowed to go on for so long, it's now developed into like a cultural like level of acceptance. So like everyone does it. And then there's also the fact that like Russian culture itself, like with the regime there, there was a really good proverb that someone said to me. I can't remember how you say it in Russian, but like in English, it's like a police officer will tell you something that they know is a lie, and then you also know it's a lie, but he also knows that you know it's a lie, but you don't say anything because it's just the way it runs. And it's that kind of like mentality that allows it to carry on, because there is no like punishments for anything. You can get away with a lot of things in Russia, as has been like shown like in recent years, and they've just never been told no from like the international community. So like it's developed into like a cultural like level of acceptance now.
Was it different? I'm sure you came across FSB officers, Russian regular servicemen, and people from so-called Donetsk People's Republic, you know, those sort of Ukrainians who decided to serve to Russia. Is there any difference between them? And how they treated you as a British on their territory?
I would probably say the DPR guys, they were a lot more unprofessional. Like they weren't really, they were just ragtag. They were pretty like subordinate to like the Russian superiors. And I think some of the like most sadistic were like those guys, because a lot of them obviously they were either before the war happened. Like for example, when I was held in a bob when I first got captured, the guy who like beat and tortured me, he was pretty flimsy with his like identification. Like he beat and stabbed me for like 3 hours while he was interrogating me, but he never wore a mask. He didn't try to hide his identity. So like later on when I got released, I remembered his face because I made sure I remembered the details of that guy. So when I did get released, the first thing I did was like go on Google. I found his details on Moratoriets, I think it's called. And I was able to find like everything about him. So like that like shows the level of competence when it comes to that. And then there was like instances where I met like the MGB, which is the Donetsk proxy version of the FSB. Again, those guys were the same, like incompetent with like hiding their identity. I was able to trick them into them believing that I didn't know how to speak Russian. And I understand Russian quite a lot. Like I'm pretty good at understanding the language. My biggest problem is pronunciation. So like I'll try to pronounce something and they would think I couldn't speak, but I could listen. So I was able to listen to what they were saying in front of me because they thought I didn't understand it. And then the interactions I did have like with the FSB or the higher up Russians, I was visited by a Russian investigator from the Investigative Committee of Russia. And I'm pretty sure he was like ex-FSB or current FSB. I'm not 100% sure, but he was very professional. Like he was very switched on, and I could tell he was like a legit like Russian because he had all the equipment that like told you like they don't just give these like just field people. Like this guy had portable printer. He was like very well built, probably in like his 50s, like very polite spoken, so to speak, with like an officer tone. He spoke English, and I've like been trying to search for him like on everything like that I can find on like social media and like the Russian social media like of like the Russian Investigative Committee, and I can't find any photos of him online. But he came across as like a very professional, military-minded like SF guy. I remember like looking on his rank, he had like colonel. So there's like a variety of like people you meet. I mean, and a lot of the people that are like in the DPR, like they're either ex-servicemen from like the BOB, which is like the Soviet police department type thing, and they chose to continue because of like the corruption or the hidden allegiances or whatever. And then you've got like guys. I had one DPR guy who I generally felt bad for me. After I'd just been sentenced to death, he like told me like, don't worry, there's like a moratorium on it, like they can't shoot you. And he says like, all this is like blah blah blah, and then eventually you'll go home. And he gave me a cigarette after the court. So that was like the only one good Russian that I met. But like the vast majority, like the other guys, like a lot of them are sadistic, especially like in the Donetsk pre-trial detention center. Like when we were in our cell, like I'd always listen to what was going on in the corridor, just so I knew if we need to get ready to stand to attention when they open the door. And we'd always hear the guards like complaining about how like they're being paid like barely any money to like do the job they're doing. And I think that like it's another factor like with why they do what they do in the prisons, because they're not getting paid, they're not happy, obviously. So that's another factor as well, along with the like sadism. So I think a lot of it is just generally it's allowed by the regime from the higher ups to continue with the treatment of like Russian handlers when they deal with like POWs.
Before you got captured, you were in Mariupol, and white public, journalists, we all remember how there was brutal, there was hell on earth. And do you have nightmares about Mariupol? Or it wasn't just, we as humans, in the most terrible moments, when something terrible happens to us, there's one of the common feeling like you just watch it and you can't believe this is happening to you.
Yeah.
And if there's something, if it's sort of something little, something sweet, something nice happening, it could be, I don't know, like, pets on the front line, those sweet, when everything is blown up, dying comrades, and there's little puppies or kittens, and you treat it differently if it was in civilian life. How you remember Mariupol, and how it's gonna sort of now is it appears in your nightmares, or maybe some flashbacks, or you catching up with people who sort of like Is there some sort of very special, maybe very painful place in your soul for Mariupol?
I'd definitely say there's like a lot of pain related to it, especially like with all the like friends and like pretty much like family that we had there. Like going through what we did. But like I'd say, because it's tricky, because when Mariupol happened, like we went into captivity, and it was difficult for us mentally to process it, because like we'd literally just gone from like being in that high risk stress environment with like heavy artillery, heavy airstrikes, like literally you could die any moment, like environment, to now being in captivity. So by the time we got released, we still hadn't processed like what we had been through in Mariupol, and I think that affected us like even more when we were released. And it wasn't until like a couple of months later, I started getting like nightmares, but like not so often, and it would always be the same, like the same situation where we're going to surrender, or I wake up, I'm in captivity again. And I remember I wake up and I wasn't able to tell if I was like dreaming or if I was like just dreaming it. So I managed to like get rid of that, like so to speak, like by speaking to a therapist. And then I started like antidepressants, which helps a lot with like the nightmare stuff. And since then, like I would probably say like I'm a lot mentally like healthier than I was like 7 months ago. Like now at the moment, like in my unit, because I rejoined the military under the International Legion, I went to rehabilitation. I'm currently in my third week, and like we've been doing like a lot of like therapy and like activities there that like help with dealing with those sort of emotions and like mental issues. So like a lot of it has been helping me a lot positively.
Why did you decide to rejoin?
So I would say initially, yeah. So initially, I joined the military back in 2018. I'd served for like 3 years. Like my contract was like due to finish. I could have left the military like in late 2021. And then like a week before I was like due to finish, like I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in because like I like the military. I ended up signing on for like one more year because I thought like what's the worst that could happen. And then when Mariupol happened, and then when we got out of captivity, I kind of like was thrown back into like the real world, like with like Britain, because we were sent to Saudi Arabia and then sent to Britain. I had some problems trying to get back to Ukraine initially because Germany, they put a travel ban on my passport because they were afraid the Russians were going to use it to get into Europe. So I had to wait for that to be sorted. And again, that also didn't help me mentally because I wasn't able to speak to people that were like in the same sort of experience that I was. And then eventually, when I did manage to come back to Ukraine, I still felt like I wasn't doing enough. I eventually tried to move into doing journalism myself because previously, before the invasion, I'd documented our time on the front line in Donbass. And I made it into like a short little documentary just to show people what life was like on the front line before the invasion. And it wasn't until November time. By this point, I've been doing military talks with like the British Army and the Dutch military. I'd also I went to Switzerland to go speak at the United Nations at the Human Rights Council about captivity, about like what happened to myself and like the guys I was with. And then I ended up going back to the front line in December to go spend some time with a friend who I wanted to go do another documentary with. And it wasn't until I got to the front line near Avdiivka, like all the problems that I'd suffered from, like with panic attacks, anxiety. I mean, I still had the anxiety because it's been such a long time at that point that I'd been back to a front line. But the emotional feeling of how I felt when I was there was like really relaxed compared to when I wasn't on the front line. And I remember saying to her, like, I think I want to stay. Like, I don't want to just go back. I want to stay and help you with your medical stuff. So I ended up helping her, like doing volunteer work with like we ended up being like this is like myself and Rebecca Mazalowski, who's an American woman who's like doing like really great medical work with the 53rd Brigade. But at the time, we ended up going into Avdiivka like a couple of weeks before it was like taken by the Russians, and we were like running supplies to the like last standing hospital there. And just being back in that environment, like it helped me a lot, like mentally and emotionally, because I felt like I was actually doing something compared to like not doing anything off the front line, like right in the rear. So like I was like there doing something. And the longer I stayed there, the more I wanted to get more involved. So it wasn't until about probably around the like beginning of April, like I messaged my friend Paul and asked him, because he was serving in the International Legion, asked him like, what do I need to do to like join? I want to join again. And eventually, after getting around, like I had to go back to my old battalion, like sign some discharge papers, and then I was able to thankfully get to the Legion and enlist for another year, which now, like with my total like service record in Ukraine, it would be like my 5th year of like service, like in total. But I think the biggest like motivator is because my entire battalion, they're still in captivity. Out of probably 268 people, probably only 30 of us got released. And of those like 30 people, like if they're not injured, they will most likely end up going back to military service. So it's more right for me to go back into military service, because I would rather continue serving like the Ukrainian military, because it's what I love, and I've always loved like this kind of job environment. And it would also show that like I'm not gonna just run away because of like what happened to me. Like I want to continue doing what I've been doing for like the past like 5 years, and also continue showing my support. That like even though after everything that Russian did to me, like they humiliated me, like they nearly killed me. Like it's still not going to put me off like supporting Ukraine. So that's like one of the biggest reasons as well.
Why do you keep talking to journalists? And it's very traumatic. It doesn't matter how delicate or, how carefully approach the subject. It's still reopening the wounds. You're harming basically your mental health every time when you talk to journalists.
I think for me, talking about it, I like to talk about it. And obviously some people would say like, and then you start like trauma dumping. But for me, like it's more therapeutic for me to like just get it out the way. So like now I can talk about like every detail from captivity. I remember it pretty well. And I remember like when I was in captivity, I kept telling myself like to remember everything. I was like trying to like, if I get out, I'm going to tell like the world about like what they've done to us. And I think that's like another part of it as well, is like I just want to keep using my voice. Like I might like I'm not gonna like take a weapon again, like because of like the terms with the prisoner exchange. Like I can't go into a combat role, so I'm going to use my voice, which is a lot more powerful because people will listen, and I've got a lot of like people that do know of me. So I think for me, it's more about supporting Ukraine with my voice, because it's a lot more powerful than me being on like a frontline position with a rifle.
When you hear speculations on Putin's suggestion to sit and do the peace talks, and because there's no so much dynamic. I mean, before Kursk's events, there's like backwards, forwards, and those gains. If Russian army gets something, it's the losses and what they gain is just incomparable. What do you feel, or what do you think about this peace talks?
I think honestly, like I feel that it's a joke, especially like since 2018. Like I went through like 2 like ceasefires, agreements, So it was the first one. We had the recommitment to the first Minsk II ceasefire back in 2019 when President Zelensky came into office, and he brought about he was really determined, and he really tried to end the bloodshed. I remember when that got brought in, it just ended up falling apart. We had restrictions in place, and the Russian side never obeyed by their side of the terms. And then I think it was back in 2021 again, it just devolved into sporadic firing. But again, this time, because the Ukrainian side was really trying to stick to the agreements, it ended up being in a position where the Russians would start shooting at us, and most of the time we couldn't shoot back because of our restrictions with maintaining the ceasefire. So I think for people to say that we should enter a ceasefire with Russia after everything that they've done previously. I mean, we've had the Minsk II ceasefire that fell apart. We've had the Minsk I ceasefire, which fell apart. And I think a lot of people kind of forget why the Minsk I ceasefire fell apart. And I always have to remind people that Russia launched an offensive on the Debaltseve, literally a few weeks after that ceasefire was signed. And then obviously you've got all the other agreements that we've done with Russia that they've just blatantly ignored. So I think honestly, I think going into a ceasefire would be a joke, but I think in reality, sooner or later we're going to have to go into some sort of negotiations, but we need to be in a position where we don't lose out. And I think this objective, I mean, I don't know what the objective is at the moment, but from what I can maybe guess, with Kursk, we want to seize territory to have a bargaining chip for the negotiation table, which makes sense. Because with the way the war is being fought, Ukraine's gone beyond what anyone ever expected them to do. I remember in the lead up to the invasion, there was a lot of people that were saying that Ukraine would fold in a week. I was skeptical, even myself. I was skeptical about how we might handle a full Russian invasion, because at that point I kind of regarded the Russian military in some sort of professional regard, in their training. Well, it wasn't until everything that happened that we quickly saw how the Russian military actually is. So they've gone well beyond what anyone expected, and they still managed to surprise people in the West with the military capability. And I think we would have been able to achieve a lot more if we weren't fighting with one hand behind our back. So I think if it continues that way and we have to continue fighting with one hand behind our back, I think eventually we're going to have to accept that we're going to end up having to lose some territory in exchange for something. But I would only be happy with that if it meant that Ukraine was given security guarantees, proper security guarantees, not like before. I think the best thing that we can do is territory for territory. If we can hold Kursk, that's the best way I can look at it. Unless we get given the opportunity to go all out with the weapon restrictions, then I think that's probably the most likely realistic point of avenue that it's going to head towards at some point.
You joined the International Legion. I don't know, did you sort of have enough time to feel the sort of atmosphere within? But I understand how people, especially those who voluntarily joined Ukrainian armed forces, they're patriotic, they want to save their country, their family, their homes. And usually those people have, sort of motivated, and motivation, big thing for them. But I can't imagine what can be the connection between different people, because International Legion is predominantly foreigners. People with different experience, different culture, background, and everything's different. How can you connect? And mind, it's all men, and it's all full of testosterone. And so there's sort of leadership games, and how you can contain them, control, and actually keep it all in a kind of normal atmosphere between, and keeping being productive?
I would probably say like, obviously like the International Legion, like it's how many years into the, like we're like 2 years into the war, so like it's still like a fairly like new unit, and especially like with Ukrainians like dealing with like foreigners, like that's a total new ball game. I mean, when I was serving in the Ukrainian Marines, like it took like the guys that I was with in my military unit to get used to us. I mean, we quickly adapted to like the Ukrainian military culture and like system, and we quickly learned the language. But I think with like the mix of like foreigners that come over, that I think a lot of it is just getting used to the Western culture, and also like the other foreigners that are there, like getting used to like the Ukrainian culture. I mean, there's always going to be like some people that are like troublemakers or stuff like that. I mean, we get that like in pretty much every military, and I mean, let alone like during wartime. When previously I was in Syria, which I haven't mentioned yet. But when we was in Syria, we had like quite a lot of Westerners, and we also like had like a lot of like the testosterone, and like sometimes there would be like instances of like people like getting too much testosterone. But we would always like end up like squeezing that sort of stuff out and like getting the discipline in order, because at the end of the day, like it's a military and it takes time, especially after the creation of like a new unit. Like the same with the Syrian Western units. It takes time to get this like into like an organized structure. So I'd probably say it's like pretty normal for like every military like new unit around the world. Especially like we're soldiers at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, but I mean, Ukraine has this sort of like this toxic Soviet, some ways. Would it be sort of like correct to say with the Ukrainian commanders, those who manage the International Legion, and having, sort of like it goes like both side adaptation, it's like sharing values, getting used to, it's just like integrate both sides integrating, and for this like Western type of army, would it be fair to say?
I would say like from my I mean, I spent like 4 years in the Ukrainian Marines, and like when I first joined in 2018, like we still had like a lot of that Soviet like military mentality, like with like the report system and everything. And like since then, like I've seen so many changes with like the Ukrainian like officers and like, the commanders, like with the way they want to like learn and like move towards the like Western NATO system. I mean, like in my old battalion, like when we would go to the training area, most of the time we'd be doing like NATO sort of like standard like level of training. And like since I've like come to like the International Legion, like I'm still like pretty shocked, because it's like pretty like compared to where I was like with the Ukrainian Marines, it's like pretty high up like with like my expectations. Like it's a lot better like in terms of like organization. And this is like one thing that I try to like tell like the other guys, like we're still like a new country, like after we got rid of like Yanukovych like in 2014, like we're still going through the process of removing like some of these like old bureaucratic systems, and there's people that want it to happen, and it's going to take time. But like with like everything that I've seen so far, like while being in Legion, like I've pretty much like I've said to my friend, like I'm probably going to end up like staying here, because like I don't want to go anywhere else. And like everything's like pretty like well organized. It's like there's a good structure to it, and there's a lot of like motivation to do stuff by like the Western like standard of like training and also organization.
After you released your book, I know it's a book of sort of like dramatic events of your life, but has it helped or like made you more popular within the girls, just like especially clever girls, those who read the books and get in touch with you? And
I think within Ukraine, like yeah, I mean I don't know, like I don't really like, I mean I have like quite a few like girls that I speak to, but like I would hope that they like me for my personality and not the book.
Yeah, but your book is just like one of the side of of your personality, because there's one.
I mean, the good thing about the good thing about the book, like I'm like a very dark humored guy. Like I love dark humor. So like with like my captivity background, like I always like make BDSM jokes, like when I'm like breaking the ice. So like I'd probably say most of the time it works.
I noticed in your stories, because I follow you on social media, and you met General Budanov, the head of Defense Intelligence. I met him as well. And I seen he signed the book for you, and then you put it on auction, didn't you? So what was your, is it your first meeting, and is it exactly what you expected, or he surprised you?
I'll be honest, I was like pretty like nervous because like I'm like I wouldn't say I'm a fangirl, but like I respect him very much because of like what he's managed to like achieve with like the whole like psyops of like targeting the Russian side, and then also with like the attacks in like Russia itself. So I have a lot of like respect and admiration for him, and then also on top of that, like he played a big part in like helping us to be exchanged. He was like dealing with helping with the negotiations for release. So like I think when I first met him, like I was like pretty nervous, and I was like nervous because someone said that he never smiles, and I was pretty. I wasn't really sure like what I was going to say, and I asked like, does he speak English? And they said that he speaks English, but like he might be a bit shy. But if he speaks English, it's a good sign that he's like comfortable. And he ended up speaking English with me, which like set my nerves like at ease. So like I think like as a person, like, he's really like sincere guy and very like respectable as like as our commander. So like I haven't really got anything negative to say about him.
Do you know, before I met him, I know pretty well his predecessors, and they are sort of like much older guys, and they have total different experience. And I didn't know what to expect, you know, because everything was, I sort of seen it on media. And so when we came for interview, and it was June 2022, and you know, it was fascinating. Obviously, he's when the camera's on, he's this commander, and the person who would never smile. But when the camera's off, he is very, very open and very. And I noticed while the cameras were setting up and everything, and I noticed he loves historical books. And he reads a lot. And before we started actual interview, he did lots of insight and references. And I was just looking at him thinking, when do you find time to read it? You know, it's clearly he's like the last person to have any sort of like second for a book. But, you know, there was something I didn't expect. And I remember there was sort of like, I think we did the interview just the day before we had to leave. That was my first visit after the big invasion. And I just, you know, I was leaving Ukraine feeling, oh, Ukraine is in capable hands. Everything's going to be well. You know, it was just, I didn't know what to expect, and I was pleasantly surprised. And yeah, there was nice exchange. There was, you know, I see this sort of like, this is the future.
I mean, he's definitely, he's like a very respected commander. I mean, even amongst like all the foreigners that I know that like serve under him, like I've never heard any foreigner that's had anything negative to say about him. Like everyone like pretty much loves him because like he knows his job. He's young, and he's like determined to like win this. So like he's got a lot of respect from like the foreigners like amongst us in like the Legion.
Yeah, and you know, you probably know more than I do, that he sometimes takes part in the special operations. And when I did the feature on liberation of Kharkiv region, and I talked to the guys who were with Kraken, and they explained, and he's still, you know, sort of like a part of managerial and political position. There's still a lot of passion for all this adrenaline stuff, which was fascinating for me. And it's not something you would expect from the person on that position. Especially when he was appointed, he was basically jump over 12 levels. And
I think that's like one of the reasons like he has so much respect, because he's still determined to fight alongside his guys. So when he can make time for it, when he's not doing the political or the intelligence stuff, like that's where a lot of his respect like comes from, because people see him as a genuine like Ukrainian patriot that will like fight alongside them when needed.
What would you say to Brits, Americans, I don't know, Canadians, any sort of people who think that war is somewhere there and Putin is or Russia is no threat to those countries where they live their peaceful and happy lives?
I'd probably tell them to like read a history book first. We had like the same situation in the 1940s. People didn't take the threat of Nazi Germany seriously. They allowed it to continue like absorbing countries that were like neighboring it. And then eventually, sooner or later, it ended up like going into Poland. And because at the time, obviously, Poland had an alliance with Britain, we ended up getting involved into the war. So again, it's going to be the same situation, and especially like with like Ukraine, after everything that it's fought for like the past like 10 years since Maidan. It's like I try to compare it with like, who would you rather have as an ally? Would you rather have like a Ukrainian that is really pro-West and they want to get behind like what we say our values and our like legacy is in the West? Or would you rather have an ally that they would never be an ally, but like, would you rather have someone like Russia who continues to be an authoritarian imperialist power that like has no regard for anyone else other than itself? And then also, I mean, you have to like look at it like from like a world point of view, like Russia, like once they take Ukraine, like if they take Ukraine, like they're not going to stop there. I mean, like look at 2008 with Georgia. Same principle. They went in on the same like principle that they went into Ukraine, saying they're trying to protect the Russian native speakers and whatnot. And then we had like Transnistria and Moldova. So these are eventually going to continue happening. And I think if Ukraine, like God forbid, if it lost this war, Georgia would be next. It would be absolved, and then also Moldova. And then eventually it's going to be one of the countries that are in NATO. And then that's when we're going to be involved. And then that's when our children or ourselves, depending on how quickly it happens, have to fight like the Russians that now have all this industry, have all this manpower from the countries that we allowed them to take. And then not only that as well, you've also got to like consider like the mass like amount of like pretty much genocide that will take place if they're allowed to win. We've seen what they've done like in Butcher, like we've seen what they've done everywhere else. I mean, I've seen what they do in captivity. Like in captivity, they had like civilians like alongside me, people that were disabled. They weren't mentally there. They were like they couldn't use the legs. They just treated them like they were nothing. So I think a lot of people in the West that like don't see Russia as a threat like need a reality like check, because sooner or later it will be on our doorstep if we don't take care of it here now.
Yeah. Thank you, Aiden. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for your time, for sharing your experience. I will leave the link to your book below the video so people can read and know more about it and get familiar with what was happening with people if they get in Russian hands. Please take care, and I hope I'll see you in Ukraine when I'm back there.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Today I talked to Aiden Aslin. He wrote the book about his captivity in Russian prison after he was taken in Mariupol while he was fighting for Ukraine with the 36th Marine Brigade. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked it, please do like and share on your social media. I really appreciate this kind support. I love this community. We're small for now, but we're so mighty. Thank you for your time. I'm Jenny Klochko. Thank you.